Hey folks, it's time for the quote of the day, and today's quote is going to come to you from one of the most important and influential psychologists of all time. And I really don't think I'm selling that short, considering pretty much anybody watching this video has been affected, molded, shaped by his ideas and his theories. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Today we are going to be quoting a man by the name of Jean Piaget, or some people say it Piaget, but I don't know. It depends on where you're from, I guess. I say Jean Piaget. Now, either way, this is a man that specialized in child developmental psychology. He is really, honestly, and I'm not joking by this, the person that kind of, well, I mean, not by himself, but for the most part, put forward essentially the structure that everybody alive today, for the most part, learned under. If you didn't learn under his structure, and it really doesn't matter if you're in public or private school, if you didn't learn under his structure, you're probably over 100 years old. So now, when I say that, I mean that quite literally. His teachings and his theories were really put into effect in our school system in the 1930s. So you really honestly have to be over 100 years old. Everybody alive today learned under some of the ideas and the teachings that he put forward. A good example of that is the way that when you go to school, you are put into a grade, right? Like that, and that has people that are your, whether it be age wise or in the same general vicinity as you. If when you go to class with, if you're five, you go to class with 5 and 6 year olds, or 4 and 5 year olds, or however you do it. And this is because of the 4 stages of development that Piaget put forward. Now, I'm not going to get into the 4 stages. I think that pretty much anybody can look them up if they want to, and they're at this point in time pretty well understood. These have been rigorously tested. They're not really up for debate anymore, even though some would consider them still to be a theory. It can be, he did have some people that spoke out against some of his teachings, and it can be that perhaps, and this is just me extrapolating here, not everybody falls under one umbrella. Not everybody learns the same way, but for the most part, we tend to follow these particular guidelines. Now, like I said, I could get into the 4 stages, but I don't really want to. What I really want to kind of focus on is what happens when things fall short. And to do that, I want to talk about the quote first. Normally, I save the quote towards the end of the video, but I want to get into it because I really want to discuss something with it. And so, with that in mind, Jean Piaget once wrote, "Every time we teach a child something, we keep him from inventing it himself. On the other hand, that which we allow him to discover for himself will remain with him visible for the rest of his life." Let me read that again. Every time we teach a child something, we keep him from inventing himself. On the other hand, that which we allow him to discover for himself will remain with him visible for the rest of his life. Okay, pretty simple idea. Piaget he firmly believed in the fact that he's actually quoted as saying that play is how we learn everything, that through play. And so when you go through the different stages, this is one of the things that he noticed. As you go through the different stages of development, the way that you play changes. I mean, this is not hard. If you're a parent, you've seen this firsthand. As you grow older, the things that you do change. The way that you play changes. And I think that that's important to understand because, like I said, I want to talk about what happens if you don't actually go through the stages effectively. And we know what happens to a certain degree because, like I said, up until about 100 years ago, this was not the way of things. This was not an understanding. Most people kind of looked at children as small adults. And you know that because we had child labor. So we would see children, despite the fact that they were not developmentally capable of really handling what they were doing, they were being forced into situations that they just had to figure out how to deal with. And that was a shock, right? Like, your system really isn't meant to do that. But because you don't have a choice, your body, the human mind being what it is, would create these situations, would create your ability essentially to do that. And it would shut off of the developmental process. Now, here's the reality, and this is something that isn't really talked about in Piaget's writing, but I this has to be true. It's inevitable that it is. Like I said, if you go back 100 years to the 1930s, we'll say that that's, rounding off a little bit. You go back to that point in time, you have people that were literally raised in these systems, and those people are the ones that raised the boomers, right? And that's important to understand. A good portion of them, maybe not quite, you could kind of, argue a couple years here and there, but for the most part, you have an entire generation, the baby boomers, that right now essentially have ruined the entire fucking world. And that's partly because their parents were not developed, were not raised in a way that was, following this understanding of child development. The boomers were raised with a very little understanding of it. But basically what you have is you have these multiple generations now that are trying to shrug off this antiquated way of thinking about the way that children are being raised, the way that children are taught, the way that children interact with the world, the way they understand things. There was a point in time when you were 10 years old, you went to the fucking factory. But now we know that that is harmful, right? Not just the fact that, children in a factory could get hurt, but literally like stunted developmentally, right? Like, and we did that to ourselves as a human species. We didn't understand. So Jean Piaget comes along and says, "Hey, I'm kind of seeing something here that I think is kind of important," and quite literally changes the world with his theories. And when I saw it was his birthday, I thought, well, shit, this is too much for a 10-minute video, but I cannot let the day go by without people understanding that a good portion of, for better and for worse, a good portion of what we understand about child development comes from this man, which means the way that you were taught, the way that you were schooled, all of these things, and the way you school your children. If you're my age, I'm about to be 51 years old. All of my kids are adults now, but they were homeschooled, and the way that they were taught was with this kind of understanding in mind, that play mattered, that that's how kids learned, that if you tell a kid, if you stand there and you tell a kid this is how it is, you never give them the opportunity to learn it for themselves. It's just base level kind of knowledge, not even knowledge that they can necessarily reach out and grab. But if you give them the opportunity to sit in it, to play with it, to experience it, to really like, kind of get down in the dirt and figure it out themselves, those lessons never leave them. Now, here's the question, and this is part of Piaget's understanding, but me doing my own little novice developmental understanding. How many people do you believe that or yourself included, did not actually get through your early years unscathed? How many of you do you believe actually went through the developmental cycle in a natural and good way? Or was it stunted in some way by tragedy or trauma or something like that? And what effect does that have on you today? The only reason I say novice developmental, psychologist, I guess you could say, is because I've been studying this quite a bit. I've been reading about it quite a bit. And I think it's fascinating the fact that a good portion of multiple generations right now are just dealing with the reverberations of the way that the greatest generation and the way that, as they're called, their forebears were all raised with this understanding that children were just tiny adults, and they were raised that way, and they didn't understand that there was a climb that they had to go through, that they couldn't possibly understand or process the things that were happening in the world around them until certain ages. And the developmental stages go up to about the age of 12 and into adulthood. And I just wonder how many generations now do we have to go through without truly understanding this, or putting it into practice at home and at school, Like, how many generations are we fucking up? How many generations are we just actively hurting our children because of something that happened, because of an understanding that we had 100 years ago? It's a good question, I think. Happy birthday to Jean Piaget. And to the rest of you, please take care of yourself, take care of others. I'll talk to you soon.